Well, in the absence of specific questions, I probably will ask a question on your behalf. And it's an old question, and much of what I'm about to say is just pure repetition. But most people are concerned with any variations of the same question, namely, how can I remove sorrow? That's on the negative side of the question. Positive side of the question is, how can I be happy? Now, if you ask most people, are you happy? Most people may well say yes at the moment. Or you may ask this question, how are you? Which is a kind of a non-genuine question, because a genuine question will have concern going along with it. How are you? And I'm prepared to sit here for days on end and listen to you. Listen to all your difficulties and problems. And most people can make a list starting from the physical to the emotional, to the domestic, to the financial, to the political, to the world affairs. You can reel off so many things, all based on the idea of a small bubble of a world, which is only confined to our sense perceptions, but we don't normally think like that. So there's a famous passage. Actually, the Katha has this question preceding the passage, and the passage is an answer to the question. And the question from the commentator ahead of the stanza says, how is he, that is, that supreme, to be known? And then what's the use of his knowledge? Why should we do it? And so that's a profound question. If you had asked that question, I would have said, what a profound question. So how is he to be known? That's the first part of the question. Second part of the question is, what is the need? Why should we know it? Now, many people will assert these two questions indirectly. So you want a spiritual life, or you think there is a God, or you want to be part of a religion, or you want some kind of spiritual practice. That's okay, but why would I need this? And the answer is contained in my first question is, how are you? And if you're not well, why not? And would you like to be happy? Would you like some kind of remedy to this? So there is a source of happiness that most people bypass. And why would they bypass it? They would bypass it because most people are living within the area of sense organs, eyes, ears, nose, touch, taste, etc. And that is their world that we're living in. Now, very fortunately, we have access to modern science, and our modern physics tells us something different, but we don't pay any attention to that either. What it says is that the most reliable physics that we have is underneath all of these sense organs and yet contains them. And there are all these energetic types, variations of one thing. And that one thing is put as potential energy. And if we know that, and I'm not quoting physics, I'm quoting some ancient text, the Ashtavakra Samhita will tell us, if we know the subtle forces behind our familiar world, we instantly will get freedom. Now, freedom is the same as happiness. Because when I say I want to be happy, another kind of co-question comes along with it. I don't want to be enslaved. I want to be free. And this expresses itself in so many different ways. I want gender freedom. I want human rights freedoms. I want political freedoms. I want economic freedoms. I want to be free. The problem is the context of what our freedom is limited to a country or a gender or a circumstance, economic and otherwise, political, etc. It's all contained in our small bubble. And is that all there is? And will we find happiness in it? Clearly not. And so the answer to this question comes out in that stanza, Indriyanam radhagabhavamudhaya stamaya chayat. And then it goes on, Pritagat Pradya Mananam Madhva Dhiro Na Shochati. And the most important thing is Na Shochati, that is, without grief. We can be devoid of grief. So having understood the dissimilarity or the senses that have their separate origin, and that they are distinct from the source or distinct from the fundamental understanding, the basis, the basic foundation that we have, and also their rising and setting, they belong alone to the wise person who then doesn't grieve anymore. Or what is the opposite of being happy? Being grieving. Now, the most severe example of grief that we have, literally, is a bereavement somewhere. That means all the senses are gone for that person, and the world that is related to that those senses are also gone. From our point of view, the person that was alive, the person that was in conversation with us, has now lost everything according to our view of it, and has extracted themselves, if you believe in life beyond death, has extracted themselves from what Sri Ramakrishna called the pillowcase, called the body. So sometimes the world in front, according to the sense organs, will please us. Sometimes it will frighten us. Sometimes it will tempt us. But at the back of our mind, we are thinking that this body will die one day. And there is a kind of awareness, a lingering shadow, a ghost that sits with us all the time, probably preceded by worry or anxiety about sickness, having seen other people being sick and dying. And we've seen this in the case of people who die, and as we get older, then many of our companions on the journey start going away one by one. And we don't want all that. We resist it. We might try to push this painful event that one day maybe it'll happen to us. You see the language we are using, completely unrealistic. The bodies will die from us. And so that will happen. And as we advance, as our train advances more toward the grave or the crematorium, then it becomes more of a thing we have to attend to at some point. We try to push it off. We can change our diet, but we have to change our way of thinking. That's the most important fundamental thing in terms of health. I once saw a movie or a series of movies about living 100 years or something like that from different people. And one thing, one common factor you could identify with is they don't really have a very stressful life. Now, there are other things there, physical walking, diet, many other things are there. But more than likely, they don't have any worries. They don't have any stress. And the only time we have a stress is in terms of our reactions. That is, that a thought that comes and is not directed properly, and it comes from a deep level, the unconscious level, what I always call the habit level, where we have learned a few fundamental things. One, we have thought, we think that I am the body with these sense organs, and the world in front can be either nice or not. It can be threatening, it can be fearful, or it can be a delightful garden. It just depends on how I look on it. I can look out at let us say, a garden scene and wonder at the structure of a leaf, or think this garden is very untidy, I should bring in a gardener. See, I'm living with this mess. See, two alternate views. That means we have a choice about directing the way we think. So the presence of the visible world has got basically the fear of death behind it. And in our daily activities, we find things which are attractive, and we find things that we are repelled by. And if we examine it properly, we'll see the whole of what we call nature, the whole of the universe is structured in this way. We have an attractive force, And in the universe, we call this gravity. Something is attracted inward, winds itself inward, is resisting an outward pull. And the thing that is resisting an outward pull comes as electrical energy. And when we look at it properly, we'll see this whole universe is working on winding in and winding out. Naturally, therefore, it comes to us in our totality as the same kind of thing as attraction and repulsion. We are attracted to one thing, we're repelled by another thing. You can call this love, we can call this fear, we can call these two pairs of opposites. We can call this desire on the one side, and we can say it's fear on the other side. For those of people who have studied the Enneagram with me, you'll see that 9 personality types can be identified, and all of them will work on the operational basis of being attracted to one thing, desiring something, and because we're resisting another thing. So in daily activities, we use this mechanism, but if it worked for us, we wouldn't sit down and say, I wish that I was happier, I wish I was more fulfilled, and I wish I didn't have this fear of death. We want to be secure, actually, and the sense objects being in front, which we call the world as such, being registered through the avenues of the sense organs, create difficulties for us. So consciousness, which is our birthright, is flowing all the time. Second by second, we find thought flows, attention flows, the thinking faculty flows. What happens to it? And the difficulty is we're not normally aware of the thought that came one moment and left the next. It's something that we have to attend to. Now, when we talk about meditation, for example, we are aware of this flow of thought. Just to quote Swami Purnananda from his introduction to the Raja Yoga, he says that this Raja Yoga, in other words, this royal path of Dhyana Yoga, of meditation, in the first place proposes to give a means of observing these internal states. Now, what internal states are there? We can come back to the Kathopanishad. The rising and setting of the sense organs, what does that mean? Well, the world in front is there with the sense organs, but they soon set. As soon as the eyes go down, then even though the sun is shining, the sun goes down with it. All sounds go down with it. All sights go down with it. All skin sensations go down with it. But then there's another rising, because we go into a dream state. And the beauty about a dream state is, without flying in the waking state, we might delight in, I wish I could fly. I admire the birds. See how freely they fly. That's a kind of example of freedom that they seem to have. Never mind that they're looking for food and are stressed about it. But they seem to be flying freely and enjoying. And yes, they are. You look at dolphins, for example. There's no doubt they're enjoying jumping up, twirling, playing. So this element of play is within us, there's no doubt. And sometimes this comes out in dream, that the thing we cannot do in the waking state, we find ourselves doing in a dream. In the waking state, only one ego is there, one sense of I. But in a dream, all the figures, all the actors on the stage, all the forms come from one dreamer. Now, in the waking state, we could also discover the same thing. And here we have to bring up a little bit of science again, because when we understand that the special relativity of Einstein will tell us that actually the sum total of our seeing events, in other words, the sum total of things within space and time. Space and time we can register in a light way and say that there's a emission and absorption event. And according to Einstein's geometric equation, they come back to the one thing, because time and space come in. He's put them in as opposites, cancelling each other out in vacuum. In other words, with no other interference. So we see something several light years away as several years away. We see it happening now, and everything that we're experiencing is really in the past because it takes time, 8.5 minutes, let's say, for the sun's light to reach our eye. Now, we don't have to understand all this except the point of it. And what is the point? The point is that the perceiver and the perceived is the same thing, but looks very different. And in our waking state, we are thinking of ourselves as individuals, completely separate from anything else, struggling with reactions against an opposing force that we have either a complaint against, or we deal with constructively, or we just give up. This is characteristic of nature itself. Nature itself says that we can do something about something, or we can refine it and make it better, or we can just relax and let things happen by themselves. And that would not be a good formula, because then we're no better than a rock, which doesn't do anything. And we're no better than any other being in nature whose desperation is to survive. So we have this attraction, repulsion, and then the next level, clinging to life. These are described as kleshas according to according to the yoga system, philosophy system, that we are intrinsically free, but things are in the way. These are obstacles. When we remove the obstacles, then the light dawns. So Vivekananda, talking about this meditation, would tell us that the instrument is the mind itself. And we don't think of it as an instrument. Actually, many people identify, I am this. You ask, who are you? Gave a talk the other night. Who are you? People immediately identify themselves as a body with a mind, and the two things combined, we say, this is me, that's I. But of course, that's not going deep enough, because both of these things identified are instrumental. Body is an instrument. The mind is an instrument. And we label it according to that analysis. We say, my body, my mind, my thought. Well, who does it belong to? So he goes on to say, the power of attention, when properly guided and directed towards the internal world, will analyze the mind and all its processes you can add, and illumine the facts for us. The powers of the mind are like rays of light dissipated. When they are concentrated, they illumine. And he goes on to say, this is our only means of knowledge. Everyone is using it, both in the external world of the senses, we may add, and the internal world of thought processing. But for the psychologist, the same minute observation has to be directed to the internal world, which the scientific man directs to the external. This requires a great deal of practice. I can go on, completing the paragraph here. He says, from our childhood upwards, we have been taught only to pay attention to things external, but never to things internal. And hence, he says, most of us have nearly lost the faculty of observing the internal mechanism. To turn the mind, as it were, inside, stop it from going outside, and then to concentrate all its powers and throw them upon the mind itself in order that it may know its own nature, analyze itself. He says it's very hard work. And anybody who's engaged in meditation will see it's not that easy. It's not hugely hard, but it requires practice, and practice is normally what we call hard work. Yet he says that is the only way to anything which would be a scientific approach to the subject. So what he's saying is, this is a scientific subject, and we have to deal with it in a practical, scientific way. And we don't have to work out how, because others have gone before us and told us exactly how. So ideas come all based upon the operation of the sense organs normally, and upon the sense objects on which they are light. But if that process, that consciousness going outwards, could be stopped just for a time, then attention that is disengaged from this preoccupation that flows out through the sense organs into the sense objects, if that could just be paused, put on pause, just for a while, for a small time, by a scientific process that Swami Vivekananda mentions, and withheld as a hand, instead of being put into a pocket or a glove to pick up things, let's say from the pocket, taken out from the pocket, attention being withdrawn, employed elsewhere into something which is steady, something which is permanent, which is already inside us and already available within us. If it could be done, then sorrow would go, our grief would go, our unhappiness would go, our difficulties would go with it. So the qualifications are given, on the sense organs having known the dissimilarity, the Kathopanishad will tell us, the dissimilarity of the senses, such as the ear and so on, originates separately. And then we have to ask, well, where are these sense organs produced? And they are produced, we will discover, by certain waves of creative force. And here we can link again with science to see underneath, the currents underneath are multivarious. These are different waves. And once we understand these waves, I'll just remind you what I said about the Avakra Samhita, that once we understand these subtle waves, these subtle forces, which we call tanmatras, then realizing this play of waves, we also realize the opposite of it, namely the thing that is steady. And that steadiness is, according to Taittiriya Upanishad, etc., is all just bliss. And that is not happiness. It's going beyond that. Bliss is not just mere happiness that comes and goes under certain conditions, that when those conditions are no longer there, it's the opposite. But it is fully blissful. Now we know moments of bliss, and we have to register those moments of bliss, because if our nature is that, naturally we'll experience it. But if our nature is that, then when we go within to the very base, that is where we will find our own nature, and our own nature is bliss. So what we call thought has this inherent quality inside it that has certain powers that become manifest progressively. And so that is the power in which we have, and that same power, when we analyze it carefully, is shown to contain certain fundamental elements. That's made very clear, for example, in the Taittiriya Upanishad, and for all Vedantic studies, we have to understand these 5 elements. So, what are they? And you have listened to me so many times, you'll know automatically when I ask this question what they are. So to make it interactive, let us ask you, what are these elements? Go on, your turn. Nothing? Not even a hint? Or are you all too shy? So we can go from the top down. For example, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad has 6 chapters within it. Shvetashvatara is the name of the sage, and Shvetashvatara really means white horses like steeds going. And it immediately conjures up some ideas of these sense organs, for example. And so we have 6 energetic forces. And where are they coming from? Now, it's important that we look at the world in this way, And so we'll start from the top down. First of all, we know that the original source is what we call Brahman. Now this Brahman, which literally indicates a kind of eternal potentiality for projecting something, we know is an absolute. Absolute means it is not subject to analysis. We cannot put in a test tube and see is it acid, is alkaline. When people equate this word with God and say, well, where is the evidence for God? As if it's something like the sun or the moon, or something like a table or a chair, something that is subject to the sense organs, not something that originates the sense organs. The Kena Upanishad, for example, will tell us, use phrases such as the eye of the eye, the ear of the ear. In other words, the source of all the sense organs. That's what we're looking for, not the thing on which the sense organs are light. And when we find this rising and setting, then we're going into this realm of other observations of rising and setting, just like the sun rises and sun sets. We can see the sense organs also have their rising and their setting, until ultimately we can see this continuous cycle that is going on, which means we have no grounds to take one particular aspect of the cycle and say, this is our reality. Common sense says we can't do it, and yet our internal gut says something different. Fear-based. Why? Because we're used to taking this world with its 5 photographs of what we understand and taking that to be the only thing that exists. Naturally, if we convince ourselves that's not the only thing, we naturally go beyond this grief. So separately produced from the basic energy. And we can see that if the brain centers also are functioning properly and attention is directed towards them, then we can hear the sound, no doubt. So it's the product of consciousness, plus also the helpful vibrations there that we pick up. And that area of vibrations, where are they coming from? Top down. They're coming from God's will or creative power. But, Swami, I thought you said there's an absolute and it's not an object. Yes. So that Brahman manifests itself. Now, that's a very difficult concept. Unless you make a comparison, unless you use an example, an analogy. You see, we're used to a kind of causation where overall nothing's really happening. We're used to a kind of causation which is just a transformation of various material things, energies. We start off with essentially with potential energy. You can test it out with a pendulum. In a pendulum, you can start it off at a certain point and swing it upward. And so on the downswing, you see it's kinetic energy, potential energy transformed into kinetic energy. And from kinetic energy, if you really do it quite quickly, then you'll see that it comes out as a kind of heat energy. And heat radiates. Now the ancient scientists, the rishis, figured all of this out thousands of years ago. So you have potential energy, you have kinetic energy, you have radiational energy, then you have electricity and you have water or earth, electricity similar to water, and then earth magnetism. Only, of course, we managed to combine the two of these into one thing, electromagnetism, seeing the relationship between there. The only thing they left out and never discovered, seemingly, was the nuclear forces. Strong and weak nuclear forces. That's 6 items. But the other 5 they already covered, long time ago. Far distant in the past to the modern discoveries of it. Relatively modern discoveries, last 100 years or so. So where are they coming from? They're coming from a kind of causation, must be there. And that causation will be of a different type, not a transformational causation where nothing essentially is changed, or nothing is eliminated and nothing is originated, but something that is transformed into a different form. You light a fire. What happens? The wood disappears, but smoke and ash appears. You weigh them all up and you see, oh, it's actually they weigh the same. There's a mechanism that is a lot of people like to use. It's a kind of carefully crafted blades of a turning thing, a kind of miniature turbine with carefully crafted and shaped blades on it. And you put it on a stand, and underneath you light a candle. And the heat goes up. Naturally, the molecules become more active. And then you have the energy now to turn this thing around. You attach some, maybe angels or something on it and look at it, and it goes round. So there's a science behind that. And all it means is that heat is transformed into kinetic energy. That's all. That's all that happens. So what kind of causation will take an absolute to a manifest thing? And that would be apparitional causation. We call it vivarta. This apparitional causation requires an analogy. Now, the beauty about having an apparitional causation is it must be evidence of something. You cannot have an apparition of nothing. So we need some examples. The most famous one we'll use, and that is the snake and the rope. In the twilight of the day, story goes, in other words, where you can't see that properly, you go out and there you see an object coiled up and you immediately come to a conclusion. This is a dangerous snake. Not in Ireland, obviously, all the snakes are gone. And then you have an option, several options. One option is you don't know what to do and you stand mesmerized. Another object is you can run away. Another option is you can attack it. Or, next option, you can investigate and verify it. You go in, you get a torch or something like that, a laser beam of some kind, you point it there at the object, and to your relief, you see it is a rope coiled up. So the snake has disappeared. If you get a friend to do it, you bring the friend along because you're fearful, and the friend, a wiser person, will look at it and you'll say, oh, thank you for saving me from the snake. No, there was no snake. So what was coiled up? It was a rope. But it had a similarity. The snake was similar to the rope. It wasn't something different from it, fundamentally. And what were the components? The rope was hidden from you. The snake was projected. And knowledge, in other words, a revealing factor, revealed it for what it is. But it has all the characteristics. This world, therefore, has all the evidence of the reality. All the components are there. Just look at them carefully. So if you say that this world has a kind of causation that is an apparitional causation, similar to the snake and the rope and so on, what we call Maya, then, first of all, the fear of the snake goes away. The certainty of what remains is absolutely there. All analogies are flawed because a rope is just a rope. So that's the flaw of every analogy. But if there's apparitional causation, it is evidence that it is an apparition of something which is fixed. And that's something, if you take time and space away, if you take space away, you have something that remains called the undivided. If you take time away, then you have something that says it's an unchanging thing. If you take the finity, the borderline, the boundary of it away, then you have the infinite. You don't have a nothing. And discovering this is through meditation. Meditation doesn't work unless your whole day, your whole attention is orientated toward the divine. And we gave a talk, I think it was on Wednesday, that mentions love. Sorry, it was Tuesday. That mentions the characteristics of love. So the easiest way is love. We all love things. So we take our inhibition, our inhibiting factor of attraction, and we use that in a positive way. Let us be attracted. You know, when we say Hari, Hari, when we say that, Hari Ram, Hari Krishna, and so on, when we say that, what does Hari mean? It means the one we are attracted to, the attractive one. That's one of the meanings. So when we are attracted toward that, when we are thirsty for that, sometimes because we are tired of all the ups and downs and difficulties of what one section of our consciousness provides. That one section being where the sense organs are operating in a certain way, and when they're shifted, then we see a different reality, and when it's shifted again, automatically, we find all of that world disappears totally and completely. So this cosmic mind comes. Cosmic mind, this cosmic creative will comes. This is God. It rules over everything. It penetrates everything. Its presence is penetrating everything. It responds to our prayers because there's only one mind, and that is cosmic mind. And from this cosmic mind comes this first potential energy. If we talk in energetic terms, we can call this Akasha. It's a wave system of divine grace. We can call it God's grace. And it produces two movements. One primarily produces sounds or varieties of sounds. And the more we understand it at the fundamental level, the more refined those sounds are. And progressively, with a matching movement, produces all the ear organs that catch it. All the sense organs, even small insects will catch it. We mention about snakes and ropes and so on. Ropes don't catch it, but the atoms within the rope catch it, and the snake catches it. When you walk and pound your feet and wear bangles, as some rural people do, you frighten all the snakes away. They'd rather run away from you than attack you, unless you're between their young. So the ears of all creatures register all the sounds. And the next one, with more faculties, slowly unfolds. And technical term, of course, is Vayu. Don't be deceived by the term. It doesn't really literally mean air, but it produces all pressures. And it produces all corresponding organs, skins, to register them as they progress, as they go over the border into our waking world of senses. And the next emergent quality will be colors and shapes and the eyes that catch them. And then the next one will be taste and taste buds to catch them. And the last one in the series will be smells and noses that catch them. So it's clear that farm animals smell differently and taste differently from what we can smell and taste, no doubt. Things which are objectionable to our smell and taste are enjoyed nicely by some farm animals. They convert all the refuse of the farm and make their bodies out of them, and some of these bodies being considered edible. There was a research farm in Zimbabwe, Henderson Research Station, and there we find pigs eating just about everything you can describe. And for delicacy point of view, I won't describe them. And that humans decide, oh, that's very tasty. Well, all the senses then are the instruments, and they're produced in order to reveal the objects that are coming first. Sense objects, sounds, touches, colors, tastes, smells coming. Get ready, wait, catch it. On our side then, And on the animal side, sense organs, all of them, taste buds, smells, everything, they're produced from the same base, namely God's creative effort. They're coming as waves, and as I say, we call these tanmatras, subtle vibrations. And that's the basis to any understanding. So when you look at any object, or look at the body, which is also an object, the first analysis will be, what is that we see? 5 areas of perception. What is behind them? And progressively, you reduce one each time. Smell alone is seen through the nostrils. Behind that is the taste. Behind that is the color, and so on. Behind that is the pressures. Behind that is the sense of sound. And progressively, just as you've gone up the ladder, there you find the creative author of this, the cosmic mind. And engaging in that, you start getting the taste of bliss. And beyond that, you go to its source. And its source is the unformed potential manifester that we call the impersonal God. And beyond that, there's a border, and that is called this apparitional causation. And there we find Brahman, and individually we actually find Atman, the self. Atman and Brahman, the same thing. Only 3 simple principles in the Vedanta philosophy. Brahman alone exists. The Atman is one with that. And this whole world is a world of waves. And to take these waves as anything more, as enemies, for example, or as simply waves that are to be observed, we have to go one step further. These are divine creative waves. These are the divine angels that make the crooked paths go straight for you. These are all waves of divine grace. They're coming for a purpose. They're coming as an expression of divine will, creative will. There's nothing else there. From every object that is seen by a steady process of stepping backwards like this to the original source, we land ourselves fully in God's grace. And God's grace converted into these waveforms. Ultimately, that's our world, the world of the senses. Similarly, with the body, we can take the body, which is also made from the same waves, and the sense objects. The body is also a sense object, of course. The mind is also a subtle sense object. These instruments are taken, 5 organs being there. The instruments are taken and start with the smell, and then go back to, the taste, and like that. Progressively, we can do it. Make our analysis, always registering them as divine grace. Then what happens internally when we do this? First of all, we're seeing the world in a different way, and our sorrow goes, because these are expressions of divine grace. More than that, we're going ever more subtly back into a source. And meditation is exactly doing that. It's a process of doing that, taking our attention from the outside progressively to the inside. Their nature of being essentially dissimilar to the nature of the self, the divine self, that is extremely pure, absolute in consciousness alone. This is, I'm reading the commentary on this Upanishad statement. So the self is constant. The other things are variable. The self is homogeneous, and these are divergent. There's a big difference, with various characteristics, variety inside them. The self, the divine self sitting inside, is unity, and the sense objects that we find in front and the sense organs that we own on our bodies are both variables. They're both dissimilar. The one doesn't change, the other things change. So there's an example like that. There's a creature called a spider. I'm sure you've come across it. Is it not amazing, actually, that a spider, without the help of a Mrs. Spider, can create from its own self this weave, this web that we are living in. This web, which is variable. And the spider is a sort of intelligent creature. It can understand when there's danger in front of it. So if you take a stick and push it away, it runs. But if you poke at the web itself, it just bounces. And because the spider is there, then the web vibrates. And if a fly lands on it, the web vibrates and the spider knows, my meal has arrived, delivered. Meals on wheels. So similarly, knowing their rising and setting, that is creation and dissolution, knowing this, all our grief goes away. And here the Vedantic system comes into it in relation to the waking and sleeping states, because the rising and setting is when the eyes close, the inner organs come out. They don't fully go down. Their inner dimension comes out. And then when they also go down, then we have this peace. But it's not peace that passes the understanding. It's a registered peace. We can recall how it looks. And so daily dream is a forecast of what will happen. Even the most frightening mythological figure of death, mounted on a buffalo, for example, can't do anything, because I can lie down, look at the clock. I must wake up at 3:30, 4 o'clock. I close my eyes and then begin to dream of a heaven or a hell or an earthly life. Whatever is the continuity of my perception is there. And the physical objects, they all go off completely. So every sleep, every time you put your head on the pillow, ultimately you're going into a dress rehearsal of this feared thing called death. And reincarnating in the morning. Hello, how are you? Did you sleep well? You ask me, did you sleep well? I say, I don't know, I was asleep. So there's a coherent condition where all the future things which could be exhibited separately are kept potentially in an emulsified form in a kind of a blank potential area that can come out. Now, if we understand that, we can creatively make it come out so that we can have a different definition now for meditation. What is meditation? A planned dream. Then what about daydreaming? Same thing, same principle. I can fantasize, I can imagine the thing which is beyond words and concepts, namely that divine entity. I can use all the faculties of my imagination, creating beautiful pictures everywhere, revaluing everything in a different way, in a beautiful way. And with palms joined, I can see everything as expressions of divine grace flowing. And flowing from where? One entity that is unmoving, unchanging. So these are just some questions and answers. Mainly I asked the questions and mainly I answered them. So we can leave it there, unless there is another question or unless there is a comment on it.
So I was reading this book, Meditation and Its Methods, and you were touching on it in the beginning. So there was this statement that to control the mind, you must go down deep into the subconscious mind, classify and arrange in order all different impressions, thoughts that are there, and control them. This is the first step. By the control over subconscious mind, you get control over the conscious mind. So how do we do it practically?
Well, firstly, I disagree with the book. Okay? No one can control the unconscious mind directly. That's not the first step. You have to use the conscious mind, because all the unconscious impressions originally came from the conscious experience. So all of our experience is learned experience. And if we take biology seriously, we'll take it all the way back to single-celled organisms that learned to be cooperative. What we call the body and mind is just a cooperative of, well, certainly of the physical, of certain cells, all making a community working in harmony, even though they're all different. So, how do we control the unconscious mind, which is necessary? Absolutely. We cannot do it directly. We have to use the avenue of conscious mind, conscious effort. This is what we call yoga. Yoga is taking our attention and steering it deliberately to higher, nobler things. We do this in our activities, called karma yoga. We do this in our emotions, called bhakti yoga, love of God, seeing God in everything. And we do it also by discerning, as we have done in this talk, between what is permanent, what is not. All these systems have to be done. This is cultivating the conscious mind. So that if you take the yoga as a process, which is the most psychological, systematic approach that we can think of, we don't start off with controlling the unconscious. We start off by moral and ethical cultivation. We start off with yam. We start off by cultivating aspects of the mind until repetition reforms our habit level of the unconscious mind. And as that becomes more of our habit, as our unconscious nature becomes our second nature, and then our first nature, and then our reactions in this world, then we have this unconscious mind dominated by the quality of purity, goodness, love, harmony. We call this sattva collectively. So we have to cultivate sattva. We have to purify the mind, purify the mental field, making sure that all our thoughts and feelings are of the highest, purest type. That means non-egoistic. Non-egoist type, full of generosity, full of spirit of service. That is our first port of call. And Patanjali has nicely put it into 5 categories, 5 items, starting off with the negative term ahimsa, but also the positive term is love. It's not that we don't harm anybody, it's that we don't even think about harming anybody. And how do we do that? We do it by love. Now we can mix it up a little bit and introduce the Bhagavad Gita, introduce Kathopanishad and so on, Isha Upanishad, seeing the self in all beings and all beings in the self, if you want to summarize it. That is seeing God in everyone. That's our first thing that we have to do. When we get used to that, the unconscious mind is being purified underneath it. That's the way of doing it. We cannot directly reform the unconscious mind. Sorry to be controversial. It's not controversial. This is standard. But any book that says, oh, you have to change the unconscious. Yes, you do, but you cannot do it directly. You have to do it. You have to make sure that the conscious mind is the gateway to the unconscious mind. And it's by consciously doing it. Otherwise, self-discipline, self-control doesn't make any sense. These are not unconscious activities. These are all conscious activities.
Yeah. Actually, Swamiji, I think it's a compilation of Swami Vivekananda's lectures edited by Swami Chetnananda. So there are like expats here and there, and things could be taken out of context, I feel.
I would definitely say so, because the whole of Raja Yoga is geared toward controlling the conscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
Swamiji, can I just mention, though, the difference between the unconscious and the subconscious?
Same thing.
Okay.
Only a difference in terminology. So when we say subconscious, either it infers that it's something inferior, which is not, it's the bulk of our psyche, or that it is below everything. Yes, that would make more sense, below the conscious mind, yes. So we can say unconscious or subconscious, same thing. All right, well, we'll leave it there then. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be on them.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah.